For centuries, many teachings attributed to Jesus were filtered, adapted, or simply removed from official religious traditions. What remained was that which reinforced obedience, hierarchy, and spiritual dependency. What was removed were simple, practical, and liberating teachings that placed the human being in direct contact with their own spiritual power. One of these teachings involves something so everyday that almost no one questions it: the use of hands in spiritual practices. Since childhood, we were taught that the right hand represents good, righteousness, the sacred. The left hand, on the other hand, was associated with error, impurity, the inappropriate. This idea was repeated so many times that it became automatic. Few people stopped to reflect on whether this really makes sense or where this rule came from. Most just replicated the behavior without realizing they were following an ancient programming. According to teachings attributed to Jesus and preserved outside the official tradition, this distinction between right and left hand is neither symbolic nor moral. It is related to the way spiritual energy circulates within the human being, and who has access to that energy. Jesus taught the chosen ones that each hand operates on a different level, and that this difference directly influences whether the energy generated remains with the person or is drained by forces that feed on it. This content was not created to provoke fear, religious conflict, or rejection of faith. It exists to bring clarity, to help the chosen ones understand why they always felt something was wrong in certain traditions, and why many spiritual practices, instead of empowering, ended up generating fatigue and exhaustion. I am George, and I am here to share teachings that were hidden, but that remain alive in the consciousness of the chosen ones. If this subject makes sense to you, if something within recognizes this truth, follow the channel now. Here you'll find content that helps protect your energy, strengthen your awareness, and walk with more clarity in your spiritual awakening. How the right-hand programming was built. From a very early age, most people were taught to use the right hand for everything considered correct, acceptable, or spiritual: eating, writing, greeting, blessing, praying. This learning did not come with a clear explanation. It was presented as a rule, as ancient tradition, as something that had always been that way. Those who questioned it were corrected. Those who insisted were reprimanded. In religious practices, this programming was even stronger. The right hand became associated with purity, blessing, and what pleases God. The left hand was linked to error, discomfort, and what should not be used in anything sacred. This idea was repeated generation after generation until it became automatic. Most people began to use the right hand in prayer without even realizing they were making a choice. The chosen ones, however, always felt a silent discomfort with this rule. It wasn't open rebellion, but an internal doubt. Something didn't seem coherent. How could two hands from the same body have opposing spiritual values? If both belong to the same consciousness, why would one be accepted and the other rejected? These questions were rarely asked out loud, but they never disappeared from within. The religious explanation was never convincing. They said it was tradition, that it was in the scriptures, that the priests taught it that way. But that didn't explain the real reason. It only reinforced obedience. And the more the rule was repeated, the deeper the programming became. Over time, this programming created automatic behavior. People began to pray the same way, perform the same gestures, always raise the same hand, without awareness of what they were activating. Spiritual practice became repetition, and along with that, a pattern began to emerge. Many people felt tired after intense prayer, exhausted after worship, or empty after long moments of devotion. That fatigue was normalized. They said it was surrender, spiritual effort, sacrifice. Few realized something was wrong. If spirituality is supposed to strengthen, why were so many people leaving weaker than they came in? That question, too, remained stored inside the chosen ones. What this hidden teaching reveals is that the programming of the right hand was not created to bring people closer to God, but to standardize the channel through which spiritual energy would be released. By imposing a single channel, the system ensured predictability, control, and constant access to the energy generated by collective and individual practices. The left hand wasn't rejected for being bad. It was rejected because it didn't obey that pattern. And anything that cannot be controlled tends to be demonized. Thus, protection was called error, and the safe channel was turned into a taboo. The chosen ones feel this because they carry a sensitivity that doesn't easily accept incoherencies. Something inside them always knew this division didn't come from God, but from a system that needed to be preserved. What Jesus taught about both hands and spiritual energy. According to teachings attributed to Jesus and preserved outside official religious tradition, the human body does not operate on just one level. There is the physical body connected to the material world and the spiritual body, which acts on a subtler dimension. These two levels coexist, but do not function in the same way. Within this understanding, the hands have different energetic functions. They are not merely physical instruments. Each one acts as a specific channel. The right hand is more connected to the material field, to what is visible, measurable, and traceable. Everything that flows through it remains within that dimension. The left hand, on the other hand, acts in a more protected spiritual field. When used in spiritual practices, it directs energy to a level that is less accessible to forces operating in the material plane. This difference is not moral nor symbolic. It is functional. Jesus used the left hand consciously, not out of habit, nor by chance. He knew that by using this channel, the energy generated during a healing, a blessing, or a prayer would not be exposed to interference. It remained intact, protected, fulfilling its purpose without being diverted. This teaching was not public. Jesus did not teach it to the crowds. It was transmitted only to the chosen ones, to those who had the spiritual maturity to understand it, without turning it into superstition or an empty rule. The goal was not to create a new ritual, but to teach protection. Jesus explained that when the right hand is used in spiritual practices, the energy flows through a field that can be perceived, tracked, and accessed by forces that feed on that energy. This does not mean all the energy is lost, but part of it is continuously drained. When the left hand is used, the energy flows through a field these forces cannot perceive. They cannot access or interfere with it. The energy remains with the person, strengthening their spiritual field instead of being diverted. That is why Jesus taught the chosen ones that using the left hand was not rebellion against God. It was spiritual wisdom. It was a simple and practical way to protect what was being generated internally. This teaching dismantles the idea that spirituality requires constant sacrifice and exhaustion. What Jesus taught was balance, preservation, and empowerment. Spiritual practice should nourish, not drain. Religious institutions knew this, and that is precisely why this knowledge was erased. The left hand needed to be turned into something forbidden, so that the system could continue to function unquestioned. The chosen ones recognize this teaching because it answers something they've always felt but could never explain. It brings coherence to what previously felt contradictory and offers a simple way to practice spirituality without losing energy in the process. Why the churches turned the left hand into a taboo. When spiritual teachings began to be organized into institutions, the focus shifted from direct experience to behavioral control. To maintain order, predictability, and authority, it became necessary to create simple rules, easy to repeat and hard to question. The distinction between right hand and left hand served this purpose perfectly. The right hand was elevated to the status of correct, pure, and acceptable. The left hand was associated with error, deviation, and spiritual danger. This narrative did not arise from a clear divine command, but from a cultural construct reinforced over centuries. By constantly repeating this idea, institutions created an automatic reflex in people, who began to obey without reflection. For the chosen ones, this rule always felt strange. Something inside them sensed that there was no spiritual logic in condemning a part of their own body. But the social and religious pressure was strong. To question it meant to challenge authorities, traditions, and even faith itself. So, many silenced their doubts. The demonization of the left hand served a specific function: to prevent people from accessing a channel of energetic protection. By forbidding its use in spiritual practices, churches ensured that all energy generated would flow through a single, predictable path, one accessible to the system that benefited from that energy. This control was reinforced from early childhood. Left-handed children were corrected, some even punished. Gestures with the left hand were seen as rude or disrespectful. Gradually, rejection became internalized. People began to feel discomfort just thinking about using the left hand for something sacred. Fear was a central tool. Associating the left hand with evil created a powerful emotional barrier. Even without understanding the reason, many avoided using it for fear of doing something spiritually wrong. This fear ensured obedience without the need for deep explanations. The chosen ones feel this conflict because they carry a more sensitive perception. They are not satisfied with tradition alone. They need coherence. And when something doesn't make sense, the discomfort lingers. That's why, upon coming into contact with this teaching, many feel relief. The pieces finally fit together. The prohibition of the left hand was not a historical accident. It was a strategy. And like any strategy based on control, it depends on repetition and lack of questioning. When the chosen one begins to question, the system begins to lose power. How energy drainage works in spiritual practices. According to this teaching, the spiritual energy generated during prayers, meditations, and rituals does not vanish into thin air. It is real, measurable in its effects, and can be directed, accumulated, or diverted. What determines this is the channel through which it flows. When the right hand is used, the energy flows through the denser field, connected to the material plane. This field is accessible to forces that feed on human emotional and spiritual states. These forces do not create energy. They depend on what humans generate, especially in moments of intense devotion. This is why so many people report feeling tired after deep spiritual practices. They believe they are exhausted from the effort or emotional surrender. But according to this understanding, part of the energy generated does not stay with them. It is drained during the process. This exhaustion doesn't happen abruptly. It's gradual. The person prays, feels temporary relief, but leaves weaker. They meditate, feel peace, but soon after comes the fatigue. They participate in spiritual gatherings and return home without energy. This pattern repeats so often that it comes to be considered normal. The left hand interrupts this flow. When it is used, the energy does not pass through the field accessible to drainage. It follows a subtler channel where these forces cannot reach. The result is immediate. The spiritual practice stops consuming and starts nourishing. The chosen one notices the difference quickly. When praying with the left hand, they feel more centered afterward. When meditating, they notice clarity instead of fatigue. The energy remains in the body, integrates with the personal field, and strengthens consciousness. This change does not require blind belief. It is confirmed through direct experience. It is simple, practical, and accessible. Precisely for that reason, it was hidden. A system that depends on people's energy cannot allow them to learn how to retain it. When the Chosen One understands this, they stop blaming themselves for spiritual fatigue. They realize they were not failing in faith, but were being drained by a model that never explained the energetic cost of imposed practices. This knowledge restores autonomy. Spirituality becomes a source of strength again, not exhaustion. And that's how the Chosen One begins to break free from the cycle of energy drainage and walk with more clarity and balance. What changes in the life of the Chosen One when using the left hand? When the Chosen One begins to use the left hand in their spiritual practices, the change doesn't happen only at the moment of prayer or meditation. It extends into daily life, into how energy is felt in the body, and into how the person relates to their own inner state. The first noticeable difference is usually simple but striking. The feeling of exhaustion decreases. Many Chosen Ones grew up believing that feeling tired after deep prayers was a sign of spiritual surrender. They learned to accept depletion as part of the path. However, when using the left hand, that logic begins to fall apart. The practice stops consuming energy and starts to organize it. Instead of finishing prayer feeling tired, the Chosen One finishes more centered, with a sense of stability. Another common change is mental clarity. The energy that previously dispersed begins to remain in the personal field. This results in more organized thoughts, less emotional confusion, and greater ease in making decisions. It's not that problems disappear, but the person no longer feels drained by them. The body also responds. Many report improved breathing, a more constant sense of presence, and less accumulated tension after spiritual practices. Spirituality ceases to be something that demands excessive effort and becomes a space for internal restoration. Over time, the Chosen One notices that their frequency changes. There's less need for external stimuli to feel well, less dependence on religious validation, approval from leaders, or complex rituals. Spiritual practice becomes more intimate, simpler, and more effective. This shift also affects sensitivity. The Chosen One becomes more aware of what drains their energy and what strengthens it. Environments, conversations, and even certain religious practices begin to be evaluated differently. The body becomes a reliable indicator. None of this happens by magic. The person does not become perfect or enlightened overnight. What changes is their relationship with their own energy. Instead of generating and losing, they generate and integrate. This creates a healthy cycle in which spirituality sustains life instead of competing with it. This is one of the reasons why this teaching was hidden. It gives autonomy back to the Chosen One. It shows that it is not necessary to suffer to be spiritual. It is possible to grow, deepen, and connect without becoming exhausted in the process. The internal and external resistance that arises with the change. As soon as the Chosen One begins to consciously use the left hand, a reaction almost always appears. This reaction does not come only from the outside, but also from within. Thoughts arise saying that it is strange, inappropriate, or even wrong. The discomfort can be strong in the first few days. This internal resistance doesn't happen by chance. It is the result of years of conditioning. The mind has been trained to associate the right hand with the sacred, and the left with error. When this pattern is broken, the mind tries to restore the old behavior, not because it's true, but because it's familiar. In addition to internal resistance, external pressure arises. Family members, friends, and religious people often correct the Chosen One when they see them praying with the left hand. Often they don't do this out of malice. but because they are repeating the same programming they received. To them, the gesture seems offensive or disrespectful. Some even claim that using the left hand is spiritually wrong, that it attracts negative things, or that it displeases God. These statements carry fear, not truth. They are reflections of a tradition that never explained its own rules. The chosen one must understand that this reaction is expected. Whenever someone steps out of a control pattern, the system reacts. The pressure is not a sign of error, but of change. If there were no impact, there would be no resistance. The most important thing at this moment is not to enter into confrontation. There is no need to convince anyone. The practice is personal. Just continue. Over time, the difference felt in the body and in one's own energy becomes stronger than any external criticism. The resistance tends to diminish as the new pattern consolidates. The left hand no longer feels strange. The gesture becomes natural. The body recognizes the protected channel and responds with more balance. This period is decisive. Many give up due to fear of judgment or initial discomfort. The chosen ones persevere because they feel that something finally makes sense. They do not continue because someone told them to, but because they recognize it within themselves. Who recognizes this teaching and who doesn't? This teaching is not understood in the same way by everyone. Some people read or hear it and feel absolutely nothing. To them, the subject seems irrelevant or meaningless. This is not a mistake or failure. It's simply the level of consciousness they are currently at. Other people feel curious but try to turn the teaching into something complex. They create rules, rituals, exceptions, and conditions. They want to know the exact moment, the correct form, the ideal context. This tendency comes from a mind still seeking control and safety. The chosen ones, however, recognize it immediately. They don't need long explanations or external validation. Something within them confirms it. They read, feel, and apply, not out of impulse but out of clarity. The recognition comes before full understanding. This difference is important. The teaching was not made to convince the masses, but to be recognized by those who were already ready. It is simple, direct, and functional. Precisely because of this, it cannot sustain itself as dogma or religion. The chosen one doesn't feel the need to announce or prove anything. They change their practice and observe the effects. Direct experience becomes the confirmation. There is no dependence on leaders, books, or institutions. Over time, the chosen one realizes that this change is only part of a larger process. Using the left hand is not an end, but an adjustment. Throughout life, many people have practiced spirituality in the only way they were taught. They used the right hand to pray, bless, give thanks, and connect with God without ever questioning why. Not because they felt deep conviction, but because they learned that this was how it was supposed to be done. Questioning was not encouraged. Obedience was expected. The chosen ones, however, always felt a silent discomfort, something that was not quite rebellion, but also never full acceptance. The sense that certain rules did not come from God, but from poorly explained human traditions. The idea that two hands from the same body could not hold opposing spiritual values always seemed incoherent, even if it was never spoken aloud. This content does not exist to attack anyone's faith or to create religious division. It exists to bring understanding, to help you comprehend why so many spiritual practices, instead of strengthening, have generated fatigue, emotional wear, and a sense of emptiness. To show that maybe the problem was never a lack of faith, but the channel through which that faith was being practiced. If you were forced to use your right hand since childhood, if you were corrected, shamed, or reprimanded for using your left hand, if you felt guilt or fear just for thinking about doing it differently, know that you are not alone. Millions of people went through the same programming, and many carried it without ever understanding why. Maybe you've left prayers feeling exhausted. Maybe you've attended intense worship services and gone home drained, without energy. Maybe you thought that was normal, that it was part of spiritual sacrifice. This content exists to show that it didn't have to be that way. The teaching of the left hand is not about creating a new ritual, or about proving who's right or wrong. It's about returning autonomy to the chosen one. It's about allowing spirituality to once again nourish, strengthen, and organize, instead of consuming and depleting. If this content helped you understand something you've always felt but could never explain, it has already fulfilled its purpose. If it brought relief, clarity, or simply made sense, trust that perception. The chosen ones recognize when something is true, even before they can put it into words. Now I want to hear from you. Comment below if you've been through this. If you were taught or forced to only use your right hand. If you were corrected or reprimanded for using your left. If you felt drained after spiritual practices and never understood why. Your comment can help others realize they are not alone, and that what they feel has an explanation. This space exists to share, reflect, and walk with more awareness. If this content spoke to you, follow the channel. Here we will continue to share teachings that help the chosen ones protect their energy, understand their sensitivity, and walk with more clarity on their spiritual path. May this content be a point of understanding, not confusion, and may it help you practice your spirituality with more balance, awareness, and freedom.